This episode is proudly supported by Monash University, promoting the Master of Indigenous Business Leadership program. For more information, head to the link in our show notes or visit www.monash.edu/Indigenous-business-leadership.
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
Welcome to another episode of the Black Magic Woman podcast. This is a special and unique partnership with the Monash Business School and the Lowitja Cooper Institute. My name is Mundanara Bales and I am your host, and this is my beautiful guest. For those that are watching us now on YouTube, and if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so. I am joined by the lovely Janine Mohamed, but before we get into our yarn, my sister, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the lands that we are on today. This is actually the Wurundjeri lands of the Kulin Nations here in Naarm, aka Melbourne. And I would also like to pay our respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We have never ceded our sovereignty as First Nations peoples living in this country now known as Australia. And in one of the other Monash episodes, I was yarning with the co-founder of Clothing the Gaps, and I actually was holding up a t-shirt with always was, always will be. So it's a famous slogan that's been around since the early 60s if you think about the Black civil rights movement in this country. So without saying too much more, I would like you, Janine, to just talk to or share your story with our listeners and also our viewers. So tell us your mob and a little bit about, your family and where you grew up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here today. I'm a Narrunga Kaurna woman. I hail from a little place not many people would know about, which is Point Pearce Mission. I grew up there. Grandmother raised, so my nana raised me. And my brothers and sisters, I think a lot of our mob were my aunties and uncles as well, because they were younger. And then I had a family of 6 children. I come from 2 very strong, well-known families in South Australia. In fact, if you go to our mission, there's one street called named after my father's family, which is Graham. And then my mother's family is the other street, which is, I know, right?
Streets named after your family, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a pretty famous little community for many of our footballers. The names are like Wanganeen comes from their goods, the Bond brothers. So in terms of, even though it's a small community, it punches way above its weight for, its contribution to the sporting arena. So I grew up there, and eventually I always knew that I wanted to be a health professional, a nurse. I'd seen my aunties try to succeed as their profession, but time again get knocked back from the local hospital. So I was probably, dare I say, one of the lucky ones, but I hesitate in saying that because it was such a tough journey. Then, my career took me on to work in nursing, obviously. Pediatric nursing was my thing. Loved kids. Yeah. Had 5 of them.
So you got 5 children?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I eventually married this lovely man.
I looked at Tell us what his name is.
Janine Mohamed. So together, he has 2 children and I have 3. So birth mother of 3, but mother of 5.
Oh, my goodness. I am the same as you. Yeah, I gave birth to 3.
Yep.
And I say 2 were like a wedding present.
You're lovely.
Thanks, peace.
And I think that's just how we're raised, right? Like to not delineate that. My mother was from a different marriage from my nana, and I never knew that until I was much older. Someone said it to me.
Your grandmother took her in, basically.
Oh, no, that was Nana's child.
Nana's child?
Yeah, but with a different man. And then she had a second lot of kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't know that they had a different father?
No, it just wasn't discussed.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they were just all brothers and sisters. That's just how
exactly
it was.
It.
Yeah.
No half, brothers?
No, not treated differently.
In-laws?
Nothing.
No, stepchildren? We don't do that, do we?
And when I do come across it, I'm sort of shocked by it because it's so different I suppose, to how I was raised. But yes, I went on to become a nurse, worked in Aboriginal affairs since about 1999. Yeah, I worked in Aboriginal aged care program with all my elders around South Australia. That was pretty deadly. The yarns, as you can imagine, the things you learn. And then went on to work for Aboriginal Health Council, SA, so in that community-controlled sector. And then one of my role models, Mary Buckskin, said to me, you're so interested in the national scene and in making sure that our mob get jobs in the health arena, go work in Canberra. So I did. I was only meant to stay 2 years on Ngunnawal country, next minute.
How many years later?
Oh, well, that was 2007. I went because Kevin Rudd had been elected, I was full of hope and young.
Yeah.
And then, so I stayed. And I moved in 2019. What a time to come to NAM,
Wow.
at the beginning of a pandemic.
So your children, are they all here with you?
No. Only got one still living with me, the baby.
Yes.
And then 2 daughters in Canberra, both studying there. One's about to head off to Korea. And then our other 2 kids are here in Melbourne, but not living with us.
Grown up, got their own lives.
Yeah, got their own lives, but always come home when they need a good feed. Always find our address,
And I love that the fact with our mob, right? Our families and kids, right? They might leave home and be independent, but at the same time, they need their mob.
I'd always have them living with me if I could.
They want their own lives.
Yeah, you let them go.
Tell me about in terms of, this is a podcast, I want to talk about business, I want to talk about leadership, and leadership more so because of the position that you're currently in now. So you are the CEO of the Lowitja Institute.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about the work? I heard about your role there firsthand, sitting in the in the university, the Monash Uni, as a student in the current program, the Masters of Indigenous Business Leadership.
Yeah.
You and Justin kind of done a lecture, presentation to us on the same day. So you just came in together and I was like, oh my gosh. One person was like, who are they? And I'm like, oh, look, she used to be, it was the nurses, the Congress.
Yeah, Congress of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander nurses and midwives.
So you were CEO there.
Yeah.
I remember Justin from Reconciliation Australia. And then for you to walk into that room, we knew that you were delivering, but just, it was a presentation that stuck with me. And I just thought, if I was doing the normal MBA program, would I have had you and Justin walk in and do a presentation? Or Laura Thompson from Clothing the Gaps? No. So this course to me, first I was able to meet you for the first time there, and now today's the second time. So you came in and done a presentation in your current role as the CEO. Can you share with people, especially people that don't know what the Lowitja Institute is?
Yeah, sure. But can I tell you, I was so nervous.
Was you?
You're going.
There's a room of black fellas.
Black fellas. So every time, it's your own mob, you kind of go, you care that much more of what people are going to think about what you're saying and how you represent. Because we never just represent ourselves, right? We represent our families, our whole community.
And there's a kind of extra pressure that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Justin and I only came because it was a group of black people. Of course, we wouldn't normally go to just any old MBA. Yeah. Not just any old MBA.
Yeah, but MBA just like going into some other class as another guest presentation.
Yeah, it's about reciprocity, giving back and hoping that we, I suppose, offer something to community that community are going to find useful. So what I'd come to talk about, this, opportunity made me think deeply, right? Because my whole life had been about cultural safety. That's probably been the thread of my work through my life since 1998. And it was actually thinking about, well, what was it as a business? And it was interesting because when I thought deeply about it, it had offered a business opportunity to many people working in the space, wanting to do the training or produce resources that if we embedded it into national policy or state and territory policy, particularly around workforce, that meant that people had to get training or resources or think deeply about it, and let alone what I was doing it for, which was anti-racism, recruitment and retention and safety of our mob.
And you was mainly focusing in the health sector.
Yeah. But Lowitja Institute, I think it's a funny thing how I came to be there. So only Pat Anderson, she's a formidable force that, when she asks you to do something, you don't say no. So I landed in Melbourne.
She asked you?
Yeah. And I landed in Melbourne and I was an Atlantic Fellow. I was meant to take a year off, do me, as my kids put it. You do you, Mum. And Justin had come here because he'd landed a job as Commissioner of Aboriginal Children and Young People. So when you always knew that was going to be a pretty, heavy job for him to be involved in. So I wanted to be there, for him and the family as well. I can honestly say I started and I thought, am I really that interested in research? Not thinking about research and our ways of knowing, being and doing and how I could do something different, not this white, non-sexy version of research. And what was really happening in this space, and still is to this day, unfortunately, is a lack of trust in our mob leading research. So just recently, we looked at some stats around a big pool of money that was given out under the banner of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander research. And less than a third of those people that got research dollars, I hate to say, are Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples. So Lowitja's probably the organisation that works to ensure that our mob get that opportunity to those big dollars. But what we do, we give out scholarships, to postdoctoral and postgraduates. So we do a whole heap of workforce work, whether that's, delivering education programs online or, supporting our membership through yarning circles. So there's the workforce side of us. There's also the policy side, which is, like I said, really speaking into Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health and what needs to happen. And then we actually give out research dollars. Yeah.
So then would it be Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people coming to Lowitja with their research topic and then instead of going to, because you could go to the national AHRMC or something, right?
NH&MRC, but I always get it mixed up with AH&MRC.
Yes, I'm like, the acronym.
Yeah.
You go to them, and that's big when you win one of their grants, right? Some of them
that's right. You made it.
50 million or 20 million.
And you're likely to get more. Yeah.
Yes.
So we try and get our mob into that bucket by just, supporting them with their idea. Yeah. So like a example is The Cultural Determinants of Health by Professor Ray Lovett now. So, he tried for a long time to get money for that grant and people couldn't understand what he was trying to research. Of course, we understand that we need our cultural determinants.
Yeah.
And that's, good for our health outcomes like social determinants. So, we funded that and now he's, people are throwing money at him.
Yeah. We'll back it out because someone else did.
Yeah, that's right. But someone that has understood. Yeah.
Isn't it deadly that we got our mob now, well, first and foremost, participating in education because not that long ago, higher education or education full stop, right? We didn't have access to education. So it's only been, 50, 60 years?
Yeah, I would say.
Since the referendum?
My nana only went to year 4. I'm sure the same for yours.
Same as my nan. Yeah. She was a domestic, sent out to work at the age of 10.
Yeah.
The level of education for a domestic, so if you don't know what a domestic is, it's basically an Aboriginal worker that is a state of the ward, so they're basically the government's property, like an orphan or a prisoner. And as a domestic, they went out to work usually on either cattle stations or in rich white people's houses. And that was my nan's experience from the age of 10. So the level of education for a domestic was year 3.
Yeah.
So I hear a lot of our mobs saying their nans or grandparents got to year 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So this kind of new wave of black fellas, the younger generation in particular, when you look at the population, so we make up 3% of the Australian population, about 50% are under the age of 25. But a large proportion, about 40%, are under the age of 15.
Absolutely.
So we've got a lot of young people. And I know I've done a lot of work with QUT and I was rolling out their mandatory cultural competence training.
Yep.
So, it was a good experience and I kind of earned my stripes as well. But in terms of the enrolments in university, we've got a lot of our mob doing non-traditional
pathways.
So not just your business, your law, education and health. They're the main ones that our mob go to.
Yep.
Because obviously, education, law, especially health is where we see a lot of our families.
And of course that has that trickle-on effect. If that mentoring of our family saying, well, they've done it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
But going back to that domestics conversation, that was Lowitja Donahue. That was her lot in life. She was taken from her family, and historical truth-telling reminds us that these kids weren't put into families that cared for them and loved them. They're put into families as domestic help.
Slaves.
Yeah, slave labour. Yeah.
And they're treated like slaves.
Yeah. So, of course, Lowitja Institute's named after her, so I couldn't go past that conversation without knowledge.
And I did not know that.
Yeah. So she's got a book out there that talks about, that was her lot in life, and had she, accepted those low expectations of her, that's where she would have remained. And thank God for all of us, she didn't.
And look what she's been able to achieve, especially through would you call it's an institution? Because it's the Lowitja Institute.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly, it's kind of a Black organisation.
Yeah, we're community controlled.
Yeah, community control.
Yeah.
So that's good to kind of separate an institution versus community controlled organisation. I just want to remind people that in terms of our history in this country, it's within people's living memory of what happened, what they experienced. And I was having a yarn with an auntie. I'm not going to say her name. Her son is a very well-known Indigenous Australian. And we're having lunch the other morning. And she started telling me about when she was 2. She was removed. And when she was 6, she got to see her mum. 4 years. And she remembers that day. And I'm sitting there trying not to cry because all I could think about is the day when my mum was removed. That was one generation ago. There were still children that were being forcibly removed. And the impacts of that are generational.
Oh, absolutely.
So in terms of, life expectancy and suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, depression, they're all kind of, I would say, symptoms of intergenerational trauma. And people don't put 2 and 2 together. Yeah,
what happened upstream and the downstream outcomes.
And I'm still getting today, I got a post on my LinkedIn post today. I got a comment from a post that I made, and this guy literally said to me, when are you going to move on? And all I kept thinking to myself is move on. We are still dealing with injustices, inequalities, and systemic racism, right? We're still dealing with all of these things today, and we need to address it. And sometimes we're the ones that call it out. And if we do call it out, then there's also consequences and repercussions as well. So look, I know you're working in a system, you're working in an organisation where you're supporting our mob around research. I'm trying to think of in terms of how do we practice our culture and build identity in organisations like the Lowitja Institute, but also in colonised spaces, because you've had that experience as well.
I have. And, I've had interesting discussions.
Or colonised systems.
Yeah. I've absolutely had interesting discussions about the system, who made it, what the blueprint of it, how can we actually decolonise a system that was never made for us, thought about us, whether we can do that. And, of course, in some instances, we've created alternative systems, right, like our Aboriginal community-controlled health sector, and that's been really successful for us.
Yeah.
And then, obviously there's a multi-pronged approach to decolonising systems, but what we do have to have in those systems is power and truth-telling in those systems. And I think about, nursing and how we had to have some serious conversations about how nursing as a profession were involved in the removal of children, horrible medical interventions that they carried out on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the name of research, and the consequences of that research, that deficit, narrative about us, that the consequences of that was allowed people to write policies that had ongoing traumatic effects for us. So, to your LinkedIn post, what I say to him is where we're moving on to, honestly. So we live it every day. So it's not like something in the past. So I can't actually, the question really is, where are we going, in this country, and where we're moving on to. I think that's something for everyone to think deeply about. But in terms of embedding culture into our organisations, I think it's a really good question, because I've been probably, unconscious of actually taking on contracts or, delivering on government asks without actually thinking deeply about what community wants. So, when you are always fighting for recurrent funding, when you're living day to day, just, jumping through hoops and essentially, doing, what would you call it, the business acumen of the organisation, all of those sorts of parts of an organisation, you actually forget why you were created, right? So an organisation that I've seen do it really, really well is IUE in Queensland, where they have the ways, where they've gone back, to community to talk about why they were established, and really make that an integral part of not just their values and their foundation, but in everything that they do, everything that they say yes to and everything they say no to as well. So it's a really deliberate way of operating.
I love the Ways framework. Do you know who co-designed it?
Yeah.
Dr. Mary Graham. Annie Mary, if you have not heard of Annie Mary, she is one of the elders at the Blak Card. So if you've done Blak Card training, highly likely you had a guest presentation by Dr. Mary Graham, but also as part of the actual Moibel program, which is the Masters of Indigenous Business Leadership, Auntie Mary, or, Professor Mary Graham, Dr. Mary Graham, she is an adjunct associate professor with the School of Political Science, International Relations, Philosophy and Psychology departments at UQ. Aunt's work around Indigenous methodologies, Indigenous research methodologies, and also it was in the Indigenous design thinking block. That was the best block, because all of the pre-work, I've been immersed in Annie Mary's work for 10 years at Blak Card.
Yep.
So I'm like putting my hand up, when you kind of, I don't know, when you're in a program or you're at a conference and you kind of understand but you don't understand, and you might want to ask a question but you're too ashamed to. This was the block where I felt I'm going to excel, because I know this work inside out, to the point where one of the lecturers said, maybe you should be lecturing. And you know what? I would confidently put my hand up next time. So being kind of, in terms of the Ways, it's a framework, and it embeds Aboriginal terms of reference. It's our knowledge that comes directly from this land.
Yeah.
And it's our approach.
And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, right? Like each organisation.
But it's a framework. Like Reconciliation. Reconciliation Australia has the RAP, Reconciliation Action Plans. So there's a framework to achieve reconciliation in your organisation. IUE, also known as the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health, very, very, I would say, famous for or known for the Deadly Choices program. I worked for IUE a while ago, a long time ago. But I remember when Deadly Sister Renee Martin, she was literally in my team when I was at IUE, Renee working with Annie Mary on this framework. And I was seeing it unfold, and I absolutely loved what they were doing. So I love the fact that you mentioned it, because it ties back to Dr. Mary Graham, whose work we had to read in terms of the literature. Having Black academics or Black scholars.
Oh, it's important.
It is important.
Blackademics, I call them.
Blackademics. And for Black fellas that have never heard of Annie Mary, to kind of read her research.
And her positionality. It's a Black perspective.
It is a Black perspective. All right. And I know we went off track there, but that was a big part of, for me, a big part of my, I guess, my motivation to go to university and now be a current student in the Moible program, I finished year 12, right? And out of my dad's children, there's 8 of them. Mum and dad have 5. They already had kids before they met. But with the 5 kids that they had together, I was the first to finish high school. And to me, that was a huge achievement. And it's still a huge achievement because statistics show that Aboriginal children are still more likely to end up in prison than they are to finish their final years of schooling.
Yeah. And of course, you know, our low age of criminal responsibility doesn't help, you know, our kids in that pathway. And that's not because we've got bad kids or bad parents, right?
Again, back to the system.
Back to the system. Yeah, I wanted to say, though, we have one other amazing Black academic.
Yes.
And his name's Professor Darryl Rigney, UTS. And if, you know, your listeners are interested, you know, in this idea of embedding the cultural determinants or culture into an organisation, there's a lot of work done at Harvard, you know, with our Indigenous brothers and sisters from Canada and America. And they've done this work on nation building. So that's another really, I suppose, amazing philosophy or way of doing our work, our way, and thinking about our political determinants of our way. So Lowitja Institute has written a discussion paper with Professor Rigney. So I encourage people to check out our website.
Get on the website and suss him out. And also when you read research, because they cite other academics.
Go deeper.
And then you go and look at that and you go and look at that and you find yourself, not in the rabbit hole, but kind of like, far out, here's a whole list of people now.
Next minute, you're doing a PhD.
Hey, that could be on the cards. Janine, I want to talk about how education, business and leadership intersect. Why is education important for business?
Why is education important for business? Look, I think it's important because we are operating in a white system, right? So we have to learn, you know, the non-Indigenous way of being in business. But leading on from that previous, you know, conversation that we had, as Black business owners, we actually don't always do business for the same reason or for the same outcome as non-Indigenous Australia. And I mean, this is only my observation, and I know it's how we commenced our little small business. It was actually about community and impact and better opportunities for our mob. So employing other Aboriginal people, you know, our board was all Aboriginal people. So there was reciprocity built into our work and wanting to be a part of that broader network. But look, I think education, you know, you have to go through it to be able to operate, dare I say, and I can only say it this way, in a white man's way. World.
Yeah.
And so it's important. And I think it gets you to think deeper. And one of the things for education with me, I learned what not to do as well and who I didn't want to be in that system. So, you know, that system told me a lot about myself as a Black woman. And of course, I had strength in identity and culture. So they couldn't tell me, you know, that deficit narrative because I was filled with all the love of my people.
Of course.
So I think, being in business, it shapes you good ways and bad ways in education.
So I'm really curious, and I haven't asked this question before with any of my other guests, but have you taken like a calculated risk of faith? And if so, did it pay off?
It's a really good question. So I think I shared this example with you when, you know, I came and gave the guest lecture. I took a leap of faith around the nursing and midwifery community where we'd done a lot of work on being on the same page about what cultural safety was, what racism was. And I said to them, look, we've put it into education standards. Now all nurses have to understand cultural safety, right? We're trying to embed it into national legislation. So our other, health workforce around us, they're having to do the same learning. How about we put it into our professional standards? And of course, once you put it into professional standards, then you're held to account. And we had to bring the whole nursing community along with us. So that's over 400,000 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander nurses being a part of that as well. Of course, we were less than 1% of the nursing and midwifery workforce, but that might have gone, changed. Yeah. But we were doing it as a leap of faith for a better outcome for our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander clients, that people had to be culturally safe. So we started this work, and it was amazing because essentially I didn't have to do much of the work, because these amazing women and men knew that they were the ones that had to do the work. That conversation that we were having before about us always doing the work and being invested in this work, because, it impacts upon us. So we went ahead and we embedded it. There was no kickback from any of the consultations that we did. And essentially it made media. Yeah. So my calculated risk didn't take into account media.
Wow.
And we had this huge media backlash because in the standards, of course, we talk about privilege, unearned privilege. So privilege that you're born with, that you don't have to understand, for example, police, the same way as a young black man does. And the statistics tell us, that we have to teach our young men about the trials and tribulations and the, I suppose, the precautions they have to take. And so, if it wasn't for a Russian spy and the Commonwealth Games, that media would have gone on and on and on. But what came of that, of course, was
So there was really a Russian spy in the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
That took over.
Yeah, that media run. Yeah. I remember sitting in Qantas and hearing my name, on the news and the Qantas lounge, bless. And I just went, and it was so deadly because, again, these non-Indigenous nurses, they stood out because they knew I'd already done that work, and I didn't need to actually be fronting the media. It was non-Indigenous people talking to non-Indigenous people about why this work needed to be done. But the other thing that I suppose was the uncalculated and unresourced risk was us talking to community about what was going to happen, because my own dad was in hospital at that time in Adelaide, played on this 7:30 report, this work, and one of his nurses tending to him said to him, Mr. Graham, I have to check my privilege before I can give you care. And, my dad was like, what's going on? So we hadn't been resourced for a campaign with our community. We'd only been sort of, mandated or resourced to do this with the nursing and midwifery community. So that was that calculated risk, and didn't take into account the receivers of the care and, getting our mob across the line with understanding this. So I think, that was a hard learning.
It's
and it was
such a good
risk.
example. And for a lot of our mob that are listening, and also for non-Indigenous people listening or watching, before you do some of these kind of things that may get to the point where there's media, right? Are our people supported, or what support is available, or do they know what's about to happen? I love that. That was a really good example.
Still would have done the work,
yeah,
but I probably would have, exactly what you said, actually thought about the impact on the ground.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can sit in our ivory towers, and I'm making myself very vulnerable here, and not think about that as an outcome, but we needed to bring other people into that campaign to actually do that work well with and for us. Yeah.
I love it. So there you go. Nothing for us without us.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to end with this. What do you hope for the next generation of Indigenous business leaders?
I think that they've got options, and that they build on the amazing work that people like you have already done. Of course, we always do. Hey, we always think about the legacy that we're walking in, the shoulders of giants. But I'd love to see my first black billionaire, just like I'd love to see my first black superhero.
Yes.
Female superhero. But I just,
first black billionaire.
Yeah, and I think, we are such innovators, 60,000+ years, and that's untapped potential of our mob. And so I think the sky's the limit. We just have to get the rest of Australia on board and to really value us.
I'm going to ask you this. What is your legacy?
Oh, my legacy, my babies, I think. Yeah, they're my greatest legacy. I think that I've created, or at least, had input into 5 amazing lives that are strong and proud in who they are. And, I just think that they're good contributors to society. So that's my legacy. And I hope I've brought, a couple of other young Aboriginal women along the journey with me.
I'm sure you have. I am one of them. I actually wanted to be a doctor a long time ago. And that's why I kind of followed your work, and I know who you are. I won the prestigious Puggy Hunter Scholarship.
Oh, deadly.
I was a student studying an advanced diploma in naturopathy.
Yeah.
That did not meet the criteria, so I had to change my course to an advanced diploma of nutritional medicine, and then I won it. So I got knocked back twice, come back again third time, and I thought, you know what, I'm glad I got knocked back twice, because I had I had 2 years to really get my grades up and to be consistent with mainly high distinctions.
Yeah.
So I did really well, nearly finished, and then started this business. So, I was thinking I was going to go to UQ, go to med school, and it didn't work out. Not that I can't do it now. I ended up going into business, and now I see that this is what I was meant to do. So yes. I just want to say, it's been a long time, 10 years in business. I would have started kind of following you about maybe 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
So to actually sit here and have this yarn with you and hear more about your story, I know that I can't wait to read Professor Rigney's paper. Yeah. I can't wait to read Lowitja's book, to hear more about her story, and just keep kind of supporting people like yourself. So if you ever need anything, if you want to talk to another sister, you now have my number, and I would love to just stay in contact with you and kind of, sometimes it's good to just have another sister to talk to.
Yeah, have a shop with. We're going clothing the gaps.
Yes, we can do that. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing the work that you do. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me, sis.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
This episode is proudly supported by Monash University, promoting the Master of Indigenous Business Leadership program. For more information, head to the link in our show notes or visit www.monash.edu/Indigenous-business-leadership.
Don't forget to follow Black Magic Woman podcast on all social media platforms. To keep up to date with the latest episodes and news, head to blackmagicwoman.com.au. You can rate and review the podcast on iTunes, and please feel free to share the podcast with your family and friends.